Because of the problems with WEP, they ended up needing to create a different way of doing encryption that was going to be more secure or certainly less prone to attack and decryption. So, what they came up with was Wi Fi protected access. Now, there are two ways of doing Wi Fi protected access there's WPA Personal and there's WPA Enterprise. And let's not save that password. Now, there's a difference, and let me go back to personal and I'll show you what the difference actually is. There isn't really a difference in terms of the encryption that is actually in use. There's a difference in terms of the authentication that is in use. Now, when WPA was created, they came up with the Temporal Key Integrity Protocol, or TKIP. TKIP was intended as a way to get around some of the issues that WEP had with regards to figuring out what the key is. So we end up with TKIP. Now, when WPA was first implemented, RC4 ended up being the encryption cipher that was in use, partly because it didn't have a lot of computational requirements. And so existing hardware that had been used for WEP could be used with WPA Personal. So all it really took was a software or a firmware update on the existing hardware in order to implement WPA Personal or WPA in general. And it didn't require actually upgrading any hardware that might be necessary with more computationally intensive protocols. Now, TKIP all by itself ends up having some problems as well. So we have the ability to do AES. If you've got a piece of hardware in your wireless access point that can handle the computation of AES, that works well. We also have TKIP plus AES that you can use. Now, as I mentioned, the problem with WPA is it ended up being prone to similar types of attack that WEP did. And so WPA, or WPA1, if you want to think of it that way, ended up being effectively broken. Now, I want to get back to the difference between personal and enterprise. When I flipped over here really quickly, what you may have noticed was it gave us a place to put a Radius authentication server. The difference between personal and enterprise is, if I flip back over to personal here, you'll see that there's a shared key. That's between the client and the access point. If I go back to enterprise, where WPA Personal has a shared key between the client and the access point, with WPA Enterprise, we have a Radius server that's going to prompt for a username and password when we try to connect to an access point that's protected with WPA Enterprise. So we give a Radius server IP address as well as a port number, and then there's a shared secret, and that is exchanged between the access point and the Radius server itself. The client knows nothing at all about that. What it is used for is to verify to the Radius server that this is a device that actually should be asking the types of questions that you would ask of a Radius server, which would be to authenticate a user based on credentials that are being passed back and forth. So we have WPA Personal, if you want to use a shared key between your client and your access point, or there's WPA Enterprise, where you can force your client to actually log in with a username and password, and that gets sent off to a Radius server that will do the authentication for you.